Okay, very much the end of the day, and regulation may not seem like the most exciting subject in the world, but I'll just briefly, and a lot of the points have been raised already by other people. So, for example, we talked briefly about process-triggered risk assessment versus product-triggered risk assessment. I'm going to mention this because I think it's a very important point for us here in the UK now, because with Brexit, I'm quite sure that the UK, with its US friends, would love to get rid of process-triggered regulation and bring in product-triggered regulation. And of course, process-triggered is absolutely vital. I mean, it's the only thing that makes any sense whatsoever. And the fact that the USA and Canada are the only two countries that have the product-triggered regulation should certainly give us pause for thought. So I think we have to be very clear on that one, that we must be very careful of that. The precautionary principle also, I mean, I'll talk about that a bit more later, but that is absolutely crucial as well. And just very briefly, I always find this an emblematic story that Francis Kelsey at the Federal Food and Drugs Administration was asked to authorise thalidomide after it had been launched in the European Union, or in Europe at that stage. And she had various questions, and she was not satisfied with the information that she was getting from Merrill, and she delayed. Merrill went and complained to the FDA and said, get rid of this woman, sack her. She's holding us up, we want to deploy this wonderful drug. A few months later, because it had been put out in Europe earlier than in the USA, news began to arrive of its impacts. And after that, Francis Kelsey did not have to say any more. And also, they had sent out some trials, some samples of the drugs in the USA, and they went to quite a lot of trouble to recall them. So that is an example of the precautionary principle in action. A quite extraordinary example of how you can actually avoid these things if you are prepared to spend time looking at them. And I think this is one of the really interesting things. We're being sort of rushed headlong, pell-mell, down this road towards, we've got this and we can do that, and if something goes wrong we can control it with the other, and so on and so forth. Whereas in fact, I think what we need to try and develop is not just the precautionary principle, which we have to rescue from all these attacks, and also we have to find a better way of expressing it than it is expressed in Principle 15 of the Rio Declaration, because it's quite weak in there. But also I think we can develop precautionary processes for discussion. And I've been in two situations, one of which others will certainly know about, and some of you will know about the other. The first was GM Nation, where a self-selected group of people started to participate in discussions about GM. And of course we had talks by pro-GM and anti-GM, and we travelled all over the place giving these talks. But the public, this was paid for by the government. And the public was able to attend and learn a lot. And this went alongside, or actually it was probably slightly after the field trials. But it was a wonderful way to really involve people in discussing these things.
There's also
and the
a narrow but deep group, isn't there?
What?
There's also a narrow but deep group. Do you remember that as part of GM Nation? It was a public debate, but there was also a random group of people that the government chose, just completely randomly, called them the narrow but deep group, and then put them in discussion and publish their findings.
Well, I'd like to say something about that too, because with the Synthetic Biology Dialogue, which was held in 2012, that was interesting because I participated from the beginning in that, and we had to fight a lot to get the information sorted that the public got. But they made a great effort to try and get people who had no affiliations whatsoever with any organisation. And we were thinking, goodness me, they're making sure that they're nothing to do with NGOs, nothing at all. This group of people came together with a number of scientists, including Paul Fremont, and a few others whose names may be familiar to you, and social scientists as well. And it was absolutely fascinating because the public picked up on various things really alertly. And the social scientists also provided an interesting critique of the way the scientists approached things. And so altogether, we got a situation where the scientists, the public ended up saying, we distrust passionate scientists. We think that there should be a global form of regulation for this, even though they've never heard of global regulation through the Cartagena Protocol, they managed to come forward with this idea themselves. And I think that we need to think about how we can develop precautionary processes to look at these things, and how obviously it's absolutely vital that these things do not escape into environments before we're able to do this, because regulation might sound like it's an attempt to regulate something that is already happening. And I would like to emphasize the fact that we really have to be proactive in regulation and say regulation must come from us. It's a societal issue. It's a global issue, like geoengineering or something like that. It's totally global. There was a woman at the geoengineering conference I was at. She was a lawyer from Kenya who rather mischievously suggested to one of the proponents of geoengineering that if you're going to have something with global impacts, you have to have a global discussion about it. And this is what we really need. I mean, in the Convention on Biological Diversity, we try to talk to indigenous people, and I say we, it's not me, it's them. They're supposed to include indigenous people in discussions, other cultures, other people. I think that these places are a good place to start on thinking, how could one really organize not just one way to, not just one one exercise in technology assessment, but ongoing exercises in technology assessment. Because really we've reached a point where we're so powerful and we're so arrogant and we're so driven by money and patents that we are becoming extremely dangerous, and we really need to have processes of technology assessment up and running. And the only way we're going to get those is if we call for them, because nobody else is going to call for them. And in a sense, what was so wonderful about the beginning of the GM campaign was that there were people out there and the call was coming, and the government actually paid for GM Nation. I mean, it is extraordinary that they put the money into that. Catch them doing that now. I mean, the synthetic biology dialogue was interesting too, from the point of view of that was funded. Since then, they've had 1 or 2 dialogues. I think the latest one was 6 hours. Great. They describe it as a dialogue. The BBSRC, the British Biotech Technology Research Council, whatever it calls itself, pretends to have public dialogue, but if you look carefully, it's not really public dialogue. I did a bit of research on this recently because I wrote an article on the subject. So we have to stand up and say, this is what we want. And we don't have to know all about this stuff, other than the fact that it's become a major threat in so many ways, whether it's to the environment, whether it's to, I mean, if we collapse mosquito numbers, you know, that has huge implications for the things that eat mosquitoes. Ecosystems are interactive, complex wholes which we don't understand the half of. So I believe that we need to call for those kind of systems with certain principles, like this must be process oriented, not product. So we have to get some basics together and call for ongoing technology assessment. I think that's all I want to say. Oh, by the way, one hopeful thing. I believe there was an Arctic fishing ban agreed.
Yes.
And I believe it's happened in advance of fishing occurring anywhere. Now that's precaution, right? Yes. That's precaution in action, so that's interesting. It can happen.